Podcast on Friday, April 12th, 2019 at 12 p.m. Again, welcome. Call the meeting to order. And we will start with the invocation and pledges by Commissioner Cooper.
Please join me in prayer. We gather together here today intent on doing good work. We seek to represent fairly and well those who have given us this task. May our efforts be blessed with insight, guided by understanding and wisdom. We seek to serve with respect for all. May our personal faiths give us strength to act honestly and well in all manners before us. Amen.
Amen.
Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner Cooper. All right, next item up on the agenda will be approval of the agenda for tonight.
So moved.
Have a motion? Second, all in favor? Aye. Next item on the agenda will be approval of the minutes from last month's meeting, March 12th.
Make a motion, we approve the minutes as written on the...
Have a motion and a second, all in favor? Aye. Motion passes, minutes approved. We have no old business, seeing that passing to the new business. The first item on the new business will be to consider an annexation of a property located at 519 Claude. Mr. Bernard.
Chairman, Commissioners, before you is a request to annex 47.6 acres piece of property on Claude Simmons Road that currently adjoin the city limits, precisely the Alexander Grove subdivision, into the Johnson City corporate limits. This request has been submitted by the property owner, Dr. Nduku, and he intends to construct the Ben Oak subdivision on this piece of property. This is a plat for the subdivision that he will be constructing, will consist of 17 single-family residential lots. In terms of plan of services, water and sewer are available on Claude Simmons Road, and he will be extending this into the property. It is city policy that if he meets the requirements and the city commission approves, then he can be reimbursed for the materials, just the material cost for water and sewer services that he will extend into this subdivision, excluding the sales tax. Staff has conducted a fiscal impact analysis for this annexation request. It should be underlined that two pieces of properties that are surrounded by the road, Claude Simmons Road, in this particular section already being in the city, and the subject property under consideration. These two lots are not included in this plan of services analysis because they have not been requested for annexation by the property owner. Based on the analysis that staff has made, considering the reimbursement that will be made to the applicant or to the developer for water and sewer utility services, and the requirement or the request that school services has made, basically indicating that a van may be needed to provide services to this particular subdivision. Staff estimates that the net fund, initial net fund, will be in a deep $18,881.45, but subsequent recurring will be positive $89,183.27. The developer has requested the R2 low density residential zoning designation for this piece of property. It currently adjoins an R2 zoning district, both the Alexander Grove subdivision and the Strawberry Field subdivision. These are all zone R2. So the R2 zoning district will essentially be designating this R2 will essentially be an extension of the adjoining R2 zoning district. Furthermore, the lot layout as proposed meet the minimum requirements for the R2 zoning district. The minimum lot size, which is lot 10, is 62,000 square feet. The R2 zoning district requires lots minimum 15,000 square feet and 90 feet lot width. All the lots meet that minimum requirement. Staff recommends approval of the annexation and recommendation of the same to the City Commission, approval of the plan of services and recommendation of the same to the City Commission, and that the Planning Commission approve the assignment of the R2 zoning district to this property and recommend same to the City Commission for approval.
Thank you, Mr. Bernard. Can you clarify for me the reason for R2 versus R1 one more time?
The R1 zoning district is the lowest zoning district that we have in terms of density. The proposed subdivision will meet the requirements even for an R1, because if you look at all the requirements for an R1 district, it will meet those requirements. Basically, the R2 is just a fit in the sense that it doesn't create, for some reason, let's say for some reason, this subdivision were not to go ahead, just for some reason, it were not to happen. Then we'll have an R1 district sticking out in the middle of nowhere. But the R2 district will be an extension of the adjoining R2 district. So the Alexander Grove subdivision, and what he intends to construct will be the same high end, same characteristic as the Alexander Grove. So this will be, for both from a zoning perspective and from the character of the area, will be in alignment. The Alexander Grove subdivision is zone R2. This thick line, that is a zoning line. From this thick line extending northeastward, that is RP3. From this thick line coming southward, that is R2 zoning district. So the Alexander Grove subdivision is R2 zoning district, it's low density, and across Claude Simmons Road is the Strawberry Field subdivision. That is also zone R2 zoning district.
That's bizarre. Okay.
Both the R1 and the R2 are all low-density residential districts.
Thank you. Any further questions for staff? No? Okay, thank you very much. Do we have anybody here wishing to speak for or against this annexation? Seeing nobody rushing the microphone, we will close the public hearing portion and open up for discussion and motions on the commission.
You got one, Bob?
Go ahead.
I'll make a motion that we approve the annexation based on that it would be contiguous on two sides to current zoning of Johnson City, and it'll be a great get for the city.
No, you have to also
I'll
state
second
these
that.
two. Do you have to do these as three separate ones, or do you want to include that all
You
together?
want it all in one or two or three motions?
Let's,
One motion.
yeah.
So, because it's annexation, approved for plan of services.
Approve the plan of services and
and
also the
R2
R2
zoning.
zoning.
Second.
Okay, so
Thanks.
we have a
That's what
motion to
legislative.
approve, we have a motion on the floor. Let me restate the motion to make sure I have it correct. To approve the annexation, approve the plan of services, and approve
R2 zoning.
the R2 zoning. Okay, excellent. Any further discussion on this matter? No, I want to bring up a point of discussion that we have created a donut hole. The two lots that are there will not be annexed nor affected. They'll remain in the county, but that would be seen by many as very poor planning and zoning over the long haul, especially with such a significant addition to the city. But according to our current state laws, it is what it is. And I hope that we don't begin to create little donut holes all throughout the city that create confusion of services, city services. So I just wanted to say that's why we've had annexation abilities in the future, is to keep up with progress as that moves along, to avoid confusion and mixture of services in the middle of the city. And this could potentially, down the road, be an issue that we'll have to deal with. But as it is, I think the good outweighs the bad. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, just since you wanted to add that comment, I feel like it's our responsibility as staff just to note to the commission, we did reach out upon the submittal of this application. We reached out to MTAS, which is the Municipal Technical Advisory Service, which is it's an institute set up at UT Knoxville that provides legal and other services back to municipal and county staff such as ourselves.
Yes, sir.
And they are aware of this, and they have advised us from a legal perspective that moving forward with this would be okay. And so they recognize the difficulty that the recent changes in annexation laws creates, but that's kind of what we have with us right now. But being able to move forward with this, we should be okay. And Hassan, with the information that he provided you and will ultimately provide to City Commission, if the recommendation is to approve, meets all the expectations of the MTAS lawyer.
Well, I appreciate it, and I'm sure everybody is just now beginning to see the unforeseen consequences across the state, and we'll figure out how to deal with it. But thank you for telling us that you've done your due diligence. Okay, go ahead and call the vote, please.
Vice Chairman Cooper,
Yes.
Commissioner Hickson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lowe,
Yes.
Commissioner Marchioni,
Yes.
Commissioner Pavlich,
Yes.
Commissioner Wild,
Yes.
Commissioner Williamson,
Yes.
Commissioner Calhoun,
Yes.
Chairman Ziones.
Yes.
Motion approved as stated.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is consider annexation of the property located at 278 South Pickens Bridge Road and 280 South Pickens Bridge Road. All right. Fantastic.
Wasn't moving forward, now it moves. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, this is a request to annex a 1.46 acre piece, two pieces of properties on South Pickens Bridge Road. They are 278 South Pickens Bridge Road and 280 South Pickens Bridge Road. So that 1.46 acres, that's putting both properties together. These properties are currently within the planning region of the planning of the city. They currently touch the city limits, so there is this will be contiguous annexation, and the developer intends to construct 4 to 8 multi-family developments on these two pieces of property, units, 4 to 8 units, multi-family developments on these pieces of property upon annexation into the city. Plan of services, this area is fully serviced by the city. Water is already available. There's are water lines in blue, and sewer is also available to be extended into this property at no additional cost to the city, if and when the developer decides to expand the site. Staff has done an estimated fiscal impact analysis for this annexation. It will be $13,655 recurring positive net gain. The developer has requested a R4 zoning district. This particular area has a unique character in the sense that the northwesterly side of South Pickens Bridge Road is predominantly single-family residential lots. The southeasterly section of the road has different uses. There are institutional uses. For example, this is a church. There is also another institutional use down on the south. That is a church. There are also multi-family apartments, multi-family uses in this southeasterly section of the road. This site currently has 8 units, multi-family development on it, and which meets the density range of medium density residential development, following what we have in our zoning code. For this reason, staff is recommending the assignment of the R4 zoning district, which is medium-density residential. Furthermore, Pickens Bridge Road is a collector street, which is essentially designated for medium and high-density residential development. Staff recommends annexation of this property, approval of the plan of services, and assignment of the R4 zoning district.
Thank you, Aisong. Thank you very much. Any questions for staff?
I have one.
Yes, sir.
Is Picking Bridge Road a county road or a city road?
A section of it is currently in the county and a section is in the city.
Is the section that this piece of annexation, will that be
In the
the
city.
city?
In the city. Yes,
Thank you, sir.
That's the only reason we can annex it, right?
Yeah. And it's, on this map, anything in color is in the city. So this section of the road.
There's the contiguous 6 feet, 30 feet.
From here extending further, that is out of the cities in the county.
Thanks, sir.
You're welcome, sir.
Any further questions for staff? No. All right, thank you very much. Well, at this time, we'll go ahead and open up for public comment. Anybody here wishing to speak for or against this annexation, please stand, approach the counter. Okay. Seeing nobody wishing to speak for or against at this time, okay, we'll go ahead and close public comment then, and open up for discussion and motions on the commission.
Motion to approve the annexation, the plan of services, and the designation R04.
Okay, we have a
Second
motion and a second from
Second from
Commissioner Williamson. So we have a motion to approve the annexation and approve the plan of services agreement and approve the zoning of R4. Any further discussion?
I would just like to hop on my annual soapbox.
Please.
This is great that we're having annexation and growth in the city. I love the fact that we're having that. I see here that this is going to be in the Lake Ridge School District. Lake Ridge is at maximum capacity already. There's going to be 3 new developments going in there. I highly encourage that we as a board start looking at land impact fees. That's my soapbox, and thank you very much.
All right, any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and call the roll.
Vice Chairman Cooper,
Yes.
Commissioner Hickson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lowe,
Yes.
Commissioner Marshoni,
Yes.
Commissioner Pavlich,
Yes.
Commissioner Wild,
Yes.
Commissioner Williamson,
Yes.
Commissioner Calhoun,
Yes.
and Chairman Zayons.
Yes.
Motion approved as stated.
Thank you. Next, item on the agenda is to consider the City of Johnson City Carver splash pad site plan.
Susie's tail.
You didn't do any better than Aisong did.
That's what I got.
Chairman, Commissioners, this is a request to approve or for you to review and comment and recommend this site plan for the construction of a splash pad at the Carver Park.
Very nice.
You're not making fun of us Southerners, are you?
The property is zoned R4, which permits recreational uses. This is an existing public facility. The address 322 West Watauga Avenue. This is a project that the Parks and Recreation Department has been working on with the state. There is some revenue from the state that will go into funding this project. State law has a requirement, mandatory referral, that projects of this nature have to come before the Planning Commission for input by the Planning Commission, basically determining, is this a good fit for this area? Does it meet policies of the comprehensive plan? Is this a direction the city wants to go from a planning perspective? Staff has reviewed this, considering the policy provisions in our comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan calls for expansion of services in our different parks, diversification of the different recreational facilities that we have in the parks. Zoning permits this in this particular area. This is a side rendering of how it's going to look like. It will be ADA accessible. You can see it's a drawing there of somebody on a wheelchair. It meets all zoning requirements. It meets comprehensive plan policies and goals, and staff recommends approval.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Just from a legislative standpoint, and having been on Parks and Rec, I think it's wonderful. It's what happens in 20 years with this when we're trying to come up with money to keep it up. And we have lots of other playgrounds that we're trying to keep up too. That creates a problem. But this is beautiful and it's a way to move forward. Rotary Park works great, but you know the pressures we hit with that on the budget. Any further discussion? Do we have any motions?
Motion to approve.
Are we supposed to approve it? Or are we just
Yeah.
supposed to be notified?
Motion to
of it?
recognize. We know we have to consult on it and recommend it or not recommend it.
Okay.
Yes.
Motion to recommend it forward.
Okay, a motion to recommend
Recommendation.
in a second. All in favor? You want to go ahead and call the roll for it then, since we're going to make that an item agenda.
It's okay to state that you're recommending approval,
Okay.
that you approve this. It's okay to
Okay.
state that.
Recommended approval, that's fine. Would you like to amend your motion to recommend
That's what I
approval?
said the first time.
Very good, it's good. Thank you, let's keep it at that. Go ahead.
Vice Chairman Cooper,
Yes.
Commissioner Hickson.
Yes.
Commissioner Lowe,
Yes.
Commissioner Marchioni.
Yes.
Commissioner Pavlich,
Yes.
Commissioner Wild,
Yes.
Commissioner Williamson.
Yes.
Commissioner Calhoun.
Yes.
And Chairman Zayas.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you. So next item on the agenda for us will be the consideration of the preliminary plat approval for the cottages at Cedar Rock Phase 3.
Chairman, Planning Commissioners, this is a request from the developer, Mr. Tim Carter, to approve a preliminary plat for the development of the cottages at Cedar Rock Phase 3. This is part of an ongoing development of a large residential subdivision along North Roan Street. The property is zone RP3, which will permit 8.5 dwelling units per acre. This was before the Planning Commission a couple of months ago for rezoning and concept plan approval. The Planning Commission recommended approval of the concept plan and the rezoning, which was subsequently approved by the City Commission. The concept plan has not changed. The developer has maintained the development of those just 3 units on this piece of property. Staff recommends approval.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and open up discussions. Anybody here wish to speak for or against this preliminary plat approval? And seeing none, we'll go ahead and close public comment and open up for discussion and motions.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the preliminary plat for cottages at Cedar Ridge.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. The motion was from Commissioner Williams, and the second was from
Marchioni.
Commissioner Marchioni. Any further discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Vice Chairman Cooper,
Yes.
Commissioner Hickson.
Yes.
Commissioner Lowe,
Yes.
Commissioner Marchioni.
Yes.
Commissioner Pavlich, Commissioner Wild,
Yes.
Commissioner Williamson,
Yes.
Commissioner Calhoun,
Yes.
and Chairman Zayas.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you. Fifth item on our agenda will be considering changes to the Johnson City Regional Planning Commission bylaws. To change the bylaws requires a 2/3 majority vote of the commission, am I correct? So we have been working on a set of bylaws to help modernize what we're doing and address current concerns and questions that have been brought up over time. Also to make our commission a bit more nimble or reactive to the needs for staff, for us to help serve staff and the community by extension, to make sure we're doing our job with long-range planning, current land use, and also legislative action. So, having seen that, this is a revision of our established working bylaws that will hopefully just make us more effective and efficient. And they've been before us, we've all had a chance to review them, so let's open up for discussion about approval or amending of what we have before us.
We need to.
Staff
add
has,
a-
go ahead.
Staff has already changed the items we discussed in the pre-meeting, or do we need to have
I'll
the?
tell you what we should do, Asong, if you wouldn't mind coming to the podium and explaining for especially those who are not here, and those who are in the audience and in the public would like to know, well, what did we materially change? What is the general idea? And again, explain to us, what are we doing? What were our concerns? Yeah, that really went well.
Sound good?
What are we doing in approving this? So, for the benefit of information and clarity, please cover what the changes are that are being made.
Thank you, sir. Most of the changes that we're making or that we're proposing for the Planning Commission to adopt are clerical. Some of them basically ensuring consistency in the use of certain words across their entire document. In some areas, we are making some very specific additions to the bylaws, which I will touch on. One area that I should call the attention of the Planning Commission to has to do with Article 3, Section 5. That has to do with chairing of the meeting. In the absence of the chairperson, the vice chairperson would chair the meeting. In the absence of the vice chairperson, the secretary would chair the meeting. And it's important to add, in the absence of the secretary, the assistant secretary would chair the meeting. If all these four officials are absent, then the Planning Commission, having a quorum, would elect somebody just to chair that particular meeting. So that has been added. In this regard, that sentence should read, in the event of the absence of both the chairperson and vice chairperson, the secretary will assume the responsibility of chairperson for that meeting and proceed with the order of business. If the chairperson, vice chairperson, and secretary are absent, the assistant secretary will assume the responsibility of chairing the meeting. If all four officials are absent, then the members present may elect a temporary chairperson for that meeting and proceed with the order of business.
Thank you. Any further additions that we need to change to, or make sure included on the final document, please make sure that you covered.
Article 10, Section 5. We've added some language there to provide some clarity in terms of conflict of interest, where the planning commissioner may have some conflict of interest on any particular item that is being considered by the planning commission. As initially proposed, it had personal interest. We proposed that be changed from personal interest to conflict of interest. In other words, it should read, when a member of the planning commission has a conflict of interest in a matter brought before the planning commission, then it is standard practice that he or she shall abstain from voting upon the issue before the planning commission.
Okay.
Section 9 is an important addition. It has to do with time limits for members of the public speaking or addressing the planning commission on different issues. The regulations will provide a very standard procedure on how the chairperson will proceed with this, instead of having a situation where persons can just speak for as long as they want. This provides the chairperson some very standard time. If you are the applicant on the item, you can address the planning commission for not exceeding 10 minutes. Sometimes an applicant may have a presentation that they want to make to the planning commission. They would send that to us. We'll be able to upload that before time, and they can have that, make that presentation during the meeting. If other members of the public wish to react to that particular presentation, they will have 3 minutes to make, not more than 3 minutes to make their input. Depending on how the meeting is going, the chairperson has the discretion to either add the time or if he sees that there are very many people who wishes to speak on that item, he can reduce it, but ensuring that those speaking for and those speaking against have equal time.
Thank you.
And finally, staff proposes the addition of standing committees to the constitution or the functioning of the Planning Commission. These will essentially be 3 standing committees: a long-range plans standing committee, current land use and transportation committee, and a legislation and policy advisory committee. Fundamentally, the members of the Planning Commission will be divided among these committees. The chairperson will appoint members to these committees. Annually, there will be flexibility depending on the items that these committees are looking at. And members of this committee, if there is a particular item, they feel like there is need to bring in some expert from the community. For example, when we're dealing with substance abuse treatment, substance abuse issues, we have some professors at the university that even the state has brought in to have been writing the state law related to these particular issues. That committee can bring them in just to provide more professional input before the item is eventually brought to the full commission for input and recommendations or decision.
Thank you. So I think that nicely covers what our changes were and our intents. And we've each had a chance to review the documents. Commissioner Marciano.
Still prefer on section 5, should recuse themselves. I'm saying should, okay? Should recuse themselves from the commission discussions, which was not mentioned by Hassan, and voting on the matter, as opposed to abstain. I'd want to have the people not commenting on their particular item of interest. That includes the discussions.
Okay. So Commissioner Marciano brings up the idea, instead of abstaining from voting, a complete recusal from the process in that situation, which creates the tension that we're here to represent and be a part of it, right?
Right.
So let's have some discussion. I'd like to have staff's input on the concern.
Sure. I just wanted to be able to provide a little bit of feedback on Commissioner Marcioni's concerns. Hassan and I didn't have a chance to get our heads together before we walked right in here after the workshop, but I was doing a little bit of reading on this, and one way that I believe you could adjust that sentence without a complete rewrite is to change the word from customary to it is the duty, because again, it goes back to it would be inappropriate to make it a shall, and should, but duty is also stronger than customary. Customary is normal. Duty is, there's an obligation inferred with the term duty. So one way that you could do that, and the other is to, in front of conflict of interest, I would add expressed, so that it's the responsibility of that person to express, to say they do have a conflict of interest. And so to amend the sentence to indicate that it is an expressed conflict of interest, the board member has a duty to recuse themselves from voting on that particular matter.
But that would,
It's still not putting my discussion.
What about this thought process here? We already have an ethics code
Sure.
that addresses this concern. So in a certain sense, this is redundant. We've been governed by an ethics code that actually addresses these concerns before. So we might argue that why are we parsing this whenever we really already have a code that tells us how we should handle these types of things?
Well, from an ethical perspective, yes. I mean, you're right. There's probably no need to duplicate your ethical standards. But in terms of the recusal, if that's not been called out specifically in the ethics code, then you could specify the recusal based on expressed conflict of interest, but that's ultimately up to you all.
Should we define?
Do we know it's not in the ethics code?
I would need to rely on.
The ethics code does not expressly call for recusal.
It does
It-
call for abstention.
It does not
From my recollection, it's been a while since I reviewed the ethics code, but
If planning commissioners permit, I can put it up. Yes, so,
If we were just to define what express
Yeah.
is.
What is the conflict of interest?
Yeah, express conflict of interest such as, i.e., boom, boom, boom.
a financial obligation or involvement or, I mean,
I
Well,
think
and
anything,
that's where, while you're reading that, if
Gets-
I could
and I-
respond to this. The thing that gets interesting as it relates to conflict of interest is it's different between quasi judicial and legislative. I realize I'm getting into the weeds here, but for legislative matters, which is a rezoning or a text amendment, typically it's if you have some direct financial interest.
could be your property though, right?
Right. And so that's the easy one. That's the most obvious for a legislative. When you get down into evidentiary hearings, that's where it gets into familial, organizational. It gets much more detailed. I think that, and we don't do any QJ. We're not doing any evidentiary hearings. So I think that if you were just to specify that conflict of interest would include direct financial benefit, then you're going to be covered.
Okay.
Yeah.
and the text, the section of the Code of Ethics, disclosure of personal interest in this has to do with non-voting matters. Disclosure of personal interest by an official with vote. An official with a responsibility to vote on a measure shall disclose during the meeting at which the vote takes place, before the vote, and so it appears in the minutes, any personal interest that affects or that would lead a reasonable person to infer that it affects the official's vote on the measure. In addition, the official may recuse himself from voting on the measure.
I don't like
That's
the
the
word may.
language in the text.
I mean, I don't.
Versus what, may versus will?
Should.
Versus shall.
well, I mean, this creates.
Well, there's a difference between shall and will.
This is the stuff we're trying to prevent whenever we make a legislative action or a recommendation that conflicts with other places in the city code. And if we put a shall here and a may here, in the ethics versus the other, it just seems like it lacks a certain single-mindedness. And I don't know if we want to create that. What's your input on that? What is your guidance and lead on that? I would be concerned that's why I was wondering, do we even need, this is pretty well spelled out from our ethical code of how we should behave ethically. Why are we rehashing this in a bylaws meeting right now?
Well, let me,
Just to bring that point up.
let me throw an angle. Really, what we want to know is whether or not there's a possibility of a conflict, right?
And they're
if I'm
required.
sitting here and we're discussing something, I know Larry's got a financial interest in it. Really, all I want to know is whether he's got a financial interest. That would not conflict with our code. I mean, the code still stands. Larry's obligated to reveal it, and then he decides whether he votes or not. I think
That's what the code states.
I think we want this to say, we're obligated to reveal it to this group, but we're not obligated either way to vote or not vote. The code tells us.
That would be a consistent, single-minded document with what the state or the city's ethics code says, I think.
Let's take a real-life scenario and just, we'll play it out. Years ago, I lived next to the county. My subdivision, next parcel was county. There was an annexation to bring that property in, but it had a cell phone tower on it. Everybody in my neighborhood didn't want it brought in. There was not a cell phone tower on it yet. But once it was brought in, there was going to be a cell phone tower on it. So in that case, I didn't want the cell phone tower. Should I have recused myself? Because it could possibly affect or not affect my property value.
I think maybe in the spirit of this, you should have at least told everybody, hey, this is in my backyard and it may affect me and I have a personal interest in it.
So that's how we should handle it.
Yes.
Okay. And then should I vote?
Then you would have the option to vote. And that's where it's interesting.
But from
because
a board standpoint, would you want me to vote? Would you want me to discuss?
I'm not sure that I wouldn't want you to vote, because the point of this body with 10 people is to represent our whole community. and it impacts people in the community, and yes, it impacted you.
Oh,
in
sure,
a real
yeah,
way.
absolutely.
And that should be represented. It's a representative, Republican, if you will. I mean,
I'm
there's a
not
certain
sure
amount of
I-
representation
I'm
in
not
that.
sure I agree with that. I've seen people, when they have had a personal interest in something, actually get up and move from this chair into the audience for the discussion and for the vote.
I think that's very important
And that is
Which
to
is- that's what I
prevent
did.
any appearance whatsoever of any type of favoritism, because otherwise you're giving the appearance, I mean, if he had said, this cell phone, this piece of property abuts mine, I know they're gonna put a cell phone tower, my property is gonna be decreased in value, so I'm opposed to it, and then he votes in the negative, then I can see how the petitioner who was trying to get that property annexed would have a case of saying this was not a fair vote.
Now, I think my difference in looking at that would be any time that it solely impacts you from a financial decision and you're the person to gain, that clearly you must recuse yourself. And ideally, we would want a person who have a direct financial impact to recuse themselves. Anytime that you happen to fall into a group of general people, that you happen to share the same general impact to community, that's going to happen more often than not, and particularly if it's not a financial impact, because that's what we're all here to represent, is the general impact in the community. And that's where honor and ethics and understanding where you are, is this more personal or is it representational for a general population? You have to decide. That's where the may comes in to recuse yourself. I think you did a good job excusing yourself. If you felt like, hey, this is too personal for me, then yeah, you probably did need to. But I'd be careful trying to be too prescriptive in that, because just because it happens to be in my backyard doesn't mean I'm not still doing a good job representing it or divorcing myself from it.
And as a private citizen,
You've got
you've got the right or the responsibility to state your case.
In fact, those people who are there with you are expecting you to represent them.
Right.
But in theory, we put on a different hat when we show up
Yes.
here. We put on a hat that is for the good of the whole
The whole
community,
city.
not
Right.
just for a
Absolutely.
particular neighborhood.
Right.
And I think if we really thought about it, we probably have we have a lot of circumstances where if we really wanted to make a case, we could make a case, yeah, I really had a personal interest in that.
That's
But,
exactly right.
again, wearing that different hat.
And hopefully we're all, fair-minded and impartial, and when we do sit in this situation, we're all divorcing ourselves from our personal interest regardless, and just trying to do what the right thing is. That's what we're charged to do. But hopefully that's why we were chosen for this board, because we're people who can do that. And there's a certain amount of honor and responsibility that goes along with that appointment. And I think we should all take that very seriously. But that it's hard when we get too prescriptive in it. I think it's very clear that if you have an individual financial risk, you need to be excused. Yes, sir.
But there is a financial aspect of Jamie's situation. If that devalued his house, that is a financial impact. What he did was to go down to the audience. He has the right as a citizen to speak to us. But to have him sit in that position and be part of the discussions, I think is inappropriate.
That's an excellent point. Whenever you see a specific financial risk that can be pointed out that way, I think that would be a very valid point to make in that situation.
Even if he's revealed it?
Yes.
I disagree.
I think, like you said, there is a
vested interest.
There is an interest, but we all have vested interests, and you can't divorce it. And you also have a responsibility to represent, as staff has informed us, and as also, like Commissioner Calhoun was mentioning.
Does our code of ethics speak to agency, whereas we sit on this board or this commission, that we are to hold the interest of the city above our own de facto in all of our discussions and decisions?
I'd have to check and get back to you on that.
Because if so, in our discussions as we sit here, in fact, we're held to that standard. And if you can't be held to that standard, then I guess that's where you recuse yourself. Or there would be no instance of recusal. If you're sitting here, on this commission, you're
Serving your
holding the
personal
interest,
interest.
you're holding the interest of the city as a
Boy,
whole
isn't that
above your.
implicit, though, whether it's written on a piece of paper or not? I mean,
And so therefore, I would say, as we sit here and discuss and vote, that we're all agreeing that we have an agency to the citizens of the city above our own.
So this is
And that's
more of a
why I'm kind of
character
wondering if this was clearly, Mr. Mitchell, this was an addition to our bylaws, correct? This section, This was not previously in our bylaws. This was covered by the ethics code, correct? This is new text we're adding. And that's where I'm saying, I wonder if, it's not that it isn't a good idea to wrestle with this issue, but it's already wrestled with elsewhere. Why are we doing it again?
You would need to even include it.
That's
Tell
what
you
I'm
why
saying.
it's
I would
been-
remove it and then just say, look, we know how to act ethically and we're held to its code of ethics.
Right.
That's why it's here.
So everything in yellow was new, correct?
Correct. Anything with a different color.
I mean, I understand what you're saying. You really want it, you want to say, I want you to be removed. But I think that's why we have a point to call each other out on ethics and say, ethically, you're supposed to tell me this.
I don't
And
know if-
ethically, I think you have a financial interest, and
I don't
ethically,
know
I
if-
think you should sit down.
I don't know if Bob Owens is still alive, but about 17, 18 years ago, as chairman of this committee, he made a speech indicating that we needed to be more ethical. I don't mind seeing this in here because it says that we intend to be ethical. We intend to follow the code of ethics, and it's in our bylaws.
Well, maybe that's what it should say,
And-
is that this should say,
Don't have no
you are
problem saying that.
expected to follow the code of ethics.
All
in
members of
regards
the planning
in-
commission
on the-
shall follow the code of ethics.
In the planning, in your decisions to recuse yourself and expose your personal interest, and to expose
You
your
have an
personal interest.
obligation
You
to
have an ob-
reveal any
Yeah.
conflict.
You need to reveal, that's probably what we should say, is that,
Much of what you're already stating is already in Chapter 3 of the Code of Ethics. So I think that what we probably could do, should do, and I should beg your pardon, in our workshop, I'm the one who introduced the term conflict of, and then Asan just enlightened me, which I appreciate. Here in the Code of Ethics, which is Chapter 3, it specifically defines personal interest, which is very similar to conflict of interest, the term that I brought forward to you. So I think what would probably be best, because this has been a great conversation, I mean, this is important, this is exactly what, this kind of thing you should be wrestling with because the public is watching. And so from a staff perspective, we would ask if you would be willing to remove that particular section from consideration from your bylaw changes and consider all other changes to the bylaws, and that you allow staff to research this, address this appropriately, and then bring this back to you. But just remove that one section, but go ahead and allow all the rest of the bylaw changes to move forward, if you're okay with that.
so we have a recommendation from staff to remove, let me name the specific section, is it Article?
Article 10, Section 5.
Section 5. Article 10, Section 5 for further review and study with intent to modify as needed. Okay.
I do think that it's important for this body to know if there's a conflict. So whatever you come up with, Director, let's at least address that there's an obligation for this body to know if a given member has a conflict.
And as far as I've ever seen the operation of this board, in my time on it, I've watched a number of people recuse themselves and literally leave the room and/or, return to the audience. And I think that's very appropriate. And I'd hope that we'd all do that anytime our conscience pricked us or our fellow commissioner, brought it to our attention. I think that's excellent. But thanks for the conversation and the extra discussion and a solution that allows us to be a little bit more thoughtful with it. So I appreciate that. Do we have any further discussion with the bylaws as they are proposed?
Just maybe a typo, maybe it's not a typo, on page 35, PC, the last sentence there in red, planning commission shall be defer the item until parties, or is that just supposed to be shall defer the item until parties involved come to an agreement?
If it's Shakespeare, be his
Yeah.
So with that typo recognized and approved, does everybody agree with that? This is your document, okay. Asan, you agree with that typo approval, okay.
So are you looking for a motion?
I am looking for motions, that's correct. Or emotion, you pick.
Do you need two motions or just one?
Can we
Do you
just-
want to remove it or?
want, we don't
One
have
don't have
motion,
any-
I
we don't
think
have
we
any
need one
motions yet.
motion to approve
Knock
the
it out.
changes
Knock it
to,
out.
okay. I move that we approve the changes to the Johnson City Regional Planning Commission bylaws with the exception of Article 10, Section 5, that staff is going to readdress and will bring to us in the future.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to approve the new bylaws as amended with the exception of Article 10, Section 5 for further study. Do we have any further discussion? No, please call the roll.
Vice Chairman Cooper,
Yes.
Commissioner Hickson.
Yes.
Commissioner Lowe,
Yes.
Commissioner Marchioni.
Yes.
Commissioner Pavlich,
Yes.
Commissioner Wild,
Yes.
Commissioner Williamson.
Yes.
Commissioner Calhoun.
Yes.
And Chairman Zion.
Yes.
Approved.
Thank you, everyone. That was good discussion. I appreciate everybody's input. Next is up, that was a fun one, appointment of committee members for our newly approved bylaws. So we have the three different committees, the long-range planning, the current land use committee, and then the legislative committee. So in the workshop, I had mentioned that if we decided to do this, I was telling you who I thought might want to or would do well at certain committees, but I don't know what your personal predilections are. But, and to help staff and to move along with our current bylaws, I would like to try to, since we have 90% attendance tonight too, which is a rare thing, I would like to go ahead and shore up some, at least temporary additions to the committee members. I would imagine with the new chair, as that rolls in August, that this will be reassigned. And also, we know that there's fluidity that can occur on these committees. So I'm saying that to mollify any concerns if you're stuck in a committee right now.
Well, can we have a little more clarification? I think we've all read the description of each of these committees, but I think there's still some questions
So
as
what
to
I'll-
what each committee would actually be addressing.
Absolutely. Asong, what we're going to do is, and this is what I'm thinking, is if you will describe each committee, long-range planning, current land use, and legislative and their activities, and then I'm going to ask for a show of hands of who's interested in which, and then we're going to move forward and see if it's anywhere close to what I was looking at. Also, if you will address the concern for something like the West Walnut District Task Force, where it was, because it's very possible that we may have to have that task force in addition to a committee, because they'll be dealing with legislative ideas, such as form zoning and whatnot, but they're also part of long-range planning. And it gets a bit schizophrenic to try to break that project up into two different committees when it really needs to be one. So I'd like to have staff's opinion on how to handle that particular project and how it would be assigned to committees, because there's interest in that here, and it affects where people want to land. So let's handle those two topics, if you will. Go ahead.
The long-range plan committee will basically provide oversight to staff in issues of long-range planning, such as comprehensive plan,
So
So
our
the-
master plan,
the master plan, neighborhood plans, because these are not short-range plans like site plans that we review. Once you approve them in the office, the next month or so, the developer pulls a permit and starts building. Long-range plans don't work that way. They're essentially goals and policies, and sometimes maybe some very specific actions that may need to be taken. They are broader. Often they go for 10 years, 10 to 20 years you're looking at. So they also, from a public perspective, there is some capital improvement elements, significant capital improvement elements involved in those kind of plans. So things like comprehensive plan, neighborhood plans, corridor plans, like West Walnut District. It would take the city over 20 years to get that whole project done.
to get it done, yes, but to implement it, it's today.
No, when I say get it done, I mean implement it, get it completed, implement the project.
Yeah, implement
Yeah.
the projects today. We're starting implementing phases to Walnut today, right?
Yeah, but
I understand it's
to
gonna take 20
complete the
years.
entire,
To see it fruition of the complete plan, but to complete the plan.
the design of the
That
plan.
has to happen now.
That has to happen now. Yeah.
Exactly.
And that committee will work on designing the plan.
So, 2 phases, design, implement, construct, right?
Yeah.
But all in one committee?
So design, and maybe I should just answer the question on the West Walnut District,
This is
because
one of my concerns about having these committees originally,
that's
is that
bringing that into place.
We
So,
need to be focused
yeah,
and flexible.
The task force, once you have a project of that nature, West Walnut District, and we create a task force, usually that task force will work on designing the plan, and once the planning commission adopts that plan, that task force transitions into an implementation force. They follow up the implementation of that plan.
Okay, fair enough.
You can have other members of the planning commission added to it at that time. If you have some very specific issues that need some expertise or some other concerns. And that's why you have that element of fluidity that the chairman was talking about.
So staff is imagining at this point, keeping our 3 standing committees, but having a continued West Walnut task force.
Yes, the West Walnut Task Force is going to remain in place.
So no matter what
That
committee
is
you're
not-
on, you could be on the West Walnut Task Force.
yes.
This is how we're looking at handling this particular issue. Okay. Is that
That's
clear?
clear.
That's
Thank
more
you.
clear.
Next time we have a West Walnut Street, quotation marks, challenge, would we set up a separate task force then also, or would we try to work through an existing committee?
We will go to the task force. That's your bedrock. That's where everything begins. And members of, let's say, the legislation and policy advisory committee can be brought into the task force, because really they're really just concerned about how is this worded from a code perspective. It's like you have the Board of Zoning Appeals will sometime make recommendations to the Planning Commission and say, this code that was written in the zoning ordinance and approved, which you recommended and the Planning Commission approved, is giving a lot of trouble from an interpretation perspective. We're recommending that this language be changed. So you sometimes have that. And that the members of this committee, of the legislation and advisory committee, can come into it, but they will just be looking at that element of, hey, how does this work with respect to all the other elements in our code? The West Walnut District Task Force, they are really concerned about West Walnut District. That's really all that concerns them. But you have some other persons that are looking at the code, not only as West Walnut District, but other areas.
Let me back up and get us back out of the weeds a little bit. So what we're really seeing is how these committees function is that the legislative, long range, and the current use would deal with these things that cities bringing into us and say, we need to look at this now instead of waiting. We need a little bit more than just an hour of your time. So let's sit down and look at these things. When any one of these committees or this body identifies a big project that's going to require a lot more than what we're dealing with here, you develop a task force. And you might pull a whole group of people that are involved with that, and or the community and other stakeholders, which is what we've done in the past. That's a whole different animal, and then it's going to move along. But now these committees, and as it is important to them, may look at that task force and what's coming out of it and understand what's going on and making sure that they're taking care of the particulars to help the implementation of the West Walnut Task Force, right? So that's how we're seeing this thing work functionally and organizationally. Not that each one of these committees is going to take on a major project like this and just ram it home and take care of it on its own or make it its own. These are more facilitator committees that are designed to help with the fluid movement, and just to kind of grease the wheels to make sure things are getting done in a timely fashion. Is that fair? And if you had a particular question, the West Walnut Task Force said, hey, I've got a question on form zoning, and we need to work on this, and I need a few people to work on that. Well, you could have staff work with this committee to bring it before everybody before you've fired off the form zoning portion of it, bringing it back to the task force or here. But it just gives you groups of people who are available to work together in a quick fashion.
Creating specialists.
Does that make sense?
That's basically the way it works. And to use the example that Dr. Massioni had pointed at in the past with respect to long-range planning, I think 2 meetings ago he mentions these plans are supposed to be updated every 5 years. What's happening with them? That's something that a long-range committee, standing committee, would have been looking at and say, we're exercising oversight on this particular issue.
In current land use might say, I want to look at green space.
Yeah.
And I want to know how we're writing green space and what's going on with that, or maybe that
Housing stock.
legislation.
What's going on with the housing?
Yeah, where would you want green space discussions? Is that going to be in current land use or is that in legislative? Which one should I put Jack on?
Wherever Jack is. We'll wait till
And
Jack
that's okay to
lands.
be a specialist, you know? I mean, it's,
Absolutely.
and I think that's what we're asking us to be, is what are your strengths and what are you,
Right.
like,
So,
So now can we just each tell you where we want to be?
well, that's
and
kind of
see
what we're
how it
going to do.
fits?
Okay, so on long range, who wants long-range planning? Raise your hand. I need to see who is interested in long range. I got LRP, I've got Mike putting his hand up. Anybody else, long range, really scratches an itch?
I'll do long range.
I got Clay, who's interested.
I wouldn't mind being part of two committees.
That's possible. You have the
I
time.
would like to be part of the legislative committee and the long-range committee.
Let's pick your priority first, and we'll work
Well, I'll tell you what my skill set is, and you tell me where it fits best.
long range and legislative. Okay, go ahead.
Typically, I'm more of a visionary, not an implementer. You know, I can plan up to the implementation part. That's my skill set. I don't like to implement. I like to plan it.
It's long range for now.
Works.
Okay. Then we'll talk about the other. So, awesome. All right, let's move on to current land use. I'm looking for, again, a show of hands. Who likes current land use issues? I would,
Transportation.
transportation.
I like transportation.
Golf is a good
I had Bob down for
Yeah,
that. I
that's a
thought
good
current land use was good for Bob. I need two people to go along with Bob because General Herald's about to be stuck on the committee.
They work well together.
Yeah. I think I'm going to put General Herald on there. He just landed on it. Who's my third? Who else would like to be on that one?
I'll try that for,
Jack's going to try it for a while. Thank you. Okay, and then that's going to leave for legislative. We've got Commissioner Williams, Commissioner Calhoun, which makes sense with him on City Commission,
everybody else.
and then,
I want to be on that.
Commissioner
That's a
Wild.
concept.
Stacy and Jack.
so I think that's the legislative stuff. I think that's, we're going over the codes and what's not. What's your thought of commissioners sitting in on other committees and things like that? I don't particularly have a problem. I want people to be interested and involved.
Absolutely.
Jamie wants to be on the
absolutely.
email list and come on over and be involved, that'd be fine with it. We'll put you on primarily long-range planning, but please be involved, and we appreciate your input.
Thanks, sir.
I
More you
think
wanna-
first and foremost, as a body, you're the planning board. And so I think, you've got to be thinking and operating in that planning mode.
That's going to be a lot of fun. I did that
the-
with Mike in college.
The only two things I kind of thought of while I was sitting down there is in terms of current planning and land use versus the legislative body. The current planning and transportation is really going to be also your subdivision review and new roads, because that's where you're the final authority. So subdivision plats, whether they're large or small, that's what it means by current land use and transportation. The legislative side is where you're acting not as the final authority, you're acting in an advisory capacity ultimately to the city commission.
Right.
And so where you're applying the comprehensive plan and the larger policies that tie into the long range, the legislative is more advisory, the current land use is you're the final word. So a little bit of a difference there.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Ultimately, the whole body is, but we need to inform one another. So long-range plan, just to go over again, we had Commissioner Marciani, Commissioner Hickson, and Commissioner Pavlich. And then for current land use, we had Commissioner Cooper, Commissioner Harrell, Commissioner Liu, and then finally, for legislative, Commissioner Calhoun, Commissioner Williams, and Commissioner Wild. And I will float. So, thank you all.
Thank you.
for-
Are you looking for a motion to adjourn?
I am, at this very moment. Oh,
Can do.
he's got one more thing.
No, I've got, yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Actually, speaking of task force and/or committees, if we could ask you to make a decision and tell me this on if this has already been done, tell me to hush and I'll sit right down. But an initiative that began with this commission has now come full circle back to this commission, and that is the beautification or blight consideration task force, the 7-member body that began in conversation form at your workshop 1 or 2 meetings ago. Since then, the other boards have met that would be supplying 2 members each, that being the Historic Zoning Commission and the Board of Dwelling Standards and Review. Those boards have since met and provided 2 members each. So we need 2 members from this board to round out the 6, and then we will be asking the City Commission for the 1 city commissioner. But it has come full circle, and then once we get this task force fully seated, then we will work towards the first meeting.
Okay. Does anybody wish to do that? But I was going to recommend Paul and Mike.
At the Historic Zoning Commission, they asked me to represent the Historic Zoning.
Oh, so you're here representing Historic Zoning Commission?
Well, and the Planning Commission, but
That's
we need 2.
We're gonna,
This
okay.
was 2 meetings.
So,
No.
in other words, you cannot do that.
It must have been the last meeting.
So, Mike, can I rope you into
Yeah.
this?
Can you,
There has to
can
be
you
this-
explain, was this the last meeting? Because I must have missed this.
This
new
is
to me.
blight, how to deal with blight in the city, which can be enforcement of codes and helping the city to enforce their codes and beautification and dealing with derelict properties and/or yards.
Oh, I'd like to be on this committee, please.
Is this so would this also be like
I'd like to
subdivision
be-
subdivision regulations,
I'll be an appointee to this committee.
signage and things like that?
No,
Not,
this is more like,
This is more like housing and stuff, cleanliness in the neighborhood, more in that direction.
getting rid of the washing
I'd
machine in
like
the
to be
front
in this.
yard.
How is that different than the Board of
Volunteer.
Dwelling
That's absolutely fine.
The Board of Dwelling Standards will also be sending members to this task force.
Okay. I mean, how long do we expect this task force to run? This should be a fairly short ordered kind of thing, 2 or 3 meetings, I would imagine we should knock this out.
You probably,
It could be
Optimistic.
long-term.
Wow.
yeah, I think you'd want to keep it.
It could be
You can
very
never
long-term.
underestimate the ability of people to drag something out.
Stacy did drive up and say, oh, there's property 1.
All right, I have one person who's interested in this committee. Are you seriously?
Yes, I am.
Okay, I do. I need one more.
Yeah, I'll help her out.
Okay, there you go. We'll take Commissioner
No.
Wild, Commissioner Pavlich. That's
The
3 committees for you in one
well-
night. You were on
Well,
fire.
here's the caveat to that. I think I roll off in July unless somebody
Go out in the blaze. Okay, I need a motion to.
Either you hire me or fire me, but you're gonna have to fill 3 spots.
Trying to make himself valuable. I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
moved.
Second, all in favor? Aye.